Shalom, guys. Welcome back to another episode here at Just Shove Your Ministries with Casa de Israelite. Thank you again for being there. Like I always say, if you like the content that we have in our channel, like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them in the comment section down below. This week's Torah portion is Torah portion Bo. We are in the book of Exodus still. We're in the beginning. We're in the trajectory of the people of Israel being redeemed from Egypt. We understood last week that Pharaoh was oppressing the people. He was putting hard labor on them, and he was not recognizing that Joseph and the descendancy of Jacob had come into the land of Egypt and had basically saved it. And now this Pharaoh has been oppressing them. So Elohim chooses Moses to go on behalf of the people of Israel in representation of Adonai, to redeem them and lead them out of Egypt. Retribution or against Pharaoh because of his action towards the people. Now, these judgments are judgments on the land and also on the ideology that the Egyptians had in the time. But before we get into that and we understand that, we're going to do the Torah blessing and we're going to read the beginning portion of this week's Torah portion. Okay? So, Baruch et Adonai HaMorah, Baruch Adonai HaMorah Leolam Ba'et, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, Benatan lanu et Torato, Baruch Ata Adonai noten HaTorah. Bless Adonai who's blessed, bless Adonai who's blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples, has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. Amen. So this week's Torah portion starts in Exodus chapter 10 and is continued to Exodus chapter 13, verse 16. So this week's Torah portion opens up like this. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe bo el Paraim chi ani hichebadeti et libo. In English, it says the following. And the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may perform these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I made the mockery of the Egyptians, and how I performed my signs among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They will also eat the rest of what has escaped, what is left to you from the hail. And they will eat every tree which sprouts from you out of the field. Then your house shall be filled with the house of all your servants and the house of all the Egyptians, something which neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen from the day that they came upon the earth until this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let them men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is destroyed? So here Adonai has an emphasis that has been going on since last Torah portion. So as the beginning of the plagues and the signs, Pharaoh's heart has been hardening. And this concept of Pharaoh's heart being hardened by God is something that is misconstrued, and it can have double meaning, and you can hit the mark with both of them, right? You can say that God hardened his heart by his actions and his miracles, and because God was performing these miracles and bringing these plagues of judgment, Pharaoh's heart grew hard, meaning that he was jealous, he was angry, he was frustrated. And also you can see it from a cultural standpoint, in which we were going to read and we're going to dive into a little bit. which is the way and the mindset that the Egyptians thought, and how God basically had just judged Pharaoh by his actions based on his mythological mindset per se. So we're going to jump into a little bit of it. Last year, I talked a lot about the gods, and I talked a lot about how each plague represented a god, and that it is an interpretation. There's an interpretation that each plague was caused by one another. So the frogs, and then after that, everything that followed was a reaction to the plague before it. There's a theory that it is believed. Also, the theory of the gods being judged is one that we pay attention to because it's part of the ideology that cements Pharaoh and makes his heart grow hard, because he's thinking that he is a deity himself and that he has this pantheon of gods in which Adonai is destroying and he is controlling it. And so we're going to get into it, but we're going to get into two main components that come up in this Torah portion, and is Maat and Re'e or Ra, which is the sun god. And Maat is the goddess of justice and order. Okay, so let's get to reading. I said this week's Torah portion is Torah portion Bo, which is go and enter, and go in front of Pharaoh. It starts in Exodus chapter 10, verse 1 to Exodus 13:16. The Haftarah portion, or the prophet portion, is Jeremiah chapter 46, verse 13 to 28. And the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament portion, is Romans chapter 9, verse 14 to 29. So last week's Torah portion, reported how Pharaoh refused to listen to Moses' pleas for Israel's freedom, despite 7 devastating plagues that came upon Egypt in God's name. In this week's Torah portion, the battle between God and Pharaoh comes to a dramatic conclusion. The last 3 of the 10 plagues are unleashed upon Egypt. A swarm of locusts devour all crops and greenery. A pulp darkness enveloped the land for 3 days and nights, and all the firstborns of Egypt were killed at the stroke of midnight. The 10 plagues in order would be the blood in the Nile, the frogs, lice, flies, the livestock, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the firstborn. 7 of them were part of last week's Torah portion. 3 of them happened this week's Torah portion. And so, very important that was part of the backbone of Pharaoh's mindset was Maat. Now, Ma'at is the goddess of truth and justice. Ma'at was an ancient Egyptian concept of cosmic order and balance. The philosophy of Ma'at allowed them to rationalize the events occurring around. As long as the universe revolved around Ma'at, there would be purity that ensured balance and justice. Through the ideology that Ma'at became the basis of Egyptian culture. Now, the Ma'at concept was personified as a goddess of truth and justice from the earliest eras in Egypt. The people considered her as an essential for the stability of life. She represented truth, justice, harmony, and balance. The opposite of chaos. Ma'at gave order to nature and society, reaching beyond being simply a goddess. Ma'at became a focus for leadership, philosophy, and law. For Ma'at, we have to understand that it became a concept and mindset. She was a goddess, and we have to understand the Egyptians created images and created stories, right? Mythological stories to understand the physical or this natural aspect of life. And that's why they gave the sun, the moon, all these components, and they created all these gods to have a visual and a vivid understanding of why things work the way that they do. And so Ma'at was described as a goddess, but the essence and the message that Ma'at brought was order, philosophy, law, and structure. Okay, let's continue. Historians found the first written accounts of Ma'at in the pyramid text, written between 2375 and 2345 BCE. However, the divine concept of the goddess is a much older idea. Ma'at is a central figure in Egyptian creation story. She was with her father Ra on his celestial bark or sailing boat as he came from the waters of the Egyptian goddess and gods. Egyptians saw Ra as the most important god in the Egyptian society. He made Ma'at even more important by standing on her pedestal to establish all creation. This placed Ma'at as the order that transformed chaos into creation. She ruled both gods and people. Historical texts transform Ma'at from goddess to an actual being in creation. In many instances, ancient Egyptians considered their society and religion to be Ma'at. The wilderness and other cultures were considered chaotic and unjust. The ideal Egyptian woman. So this is a depiction of how Ma'at would be depicted in drawings in Egypt. And so Ma'at is often represented as a slim woman with a white ostrich feather on her head. She often carries a scepter or an ankh. Some ancient representations feature Ma'at with wings of divinity outstretched. Egyptians viewed her slim figure and symmetrical features to represent an appearance of the perfect Egyptian woman. Ma'at ruled everything, which made her a very busy goddess. Every day she helped Ra to steer his boat across the sky, making the path for the sun. She was the partner of Thoth and the mother of the 8 deities known as the chief gods and goddesses of Hermopolis. Beyond being the force of which kept Egypt functioning as an orderly society, Ma'at held an important role in afterlife. She not only kept order among the living, but served as the judge of the afterlife. And this is a depiction of Ma'at depictions of her with her wings covering the mummification of Osiris. And so this is her and how she is depicted as a protector of the living and of the dead as well. When Egyptians died, the process of mummification included living the heart within the body. Egyptians considered the heart to be the soul of a person by which he or she would be judged in the afterlife. After death, Ma'at would judge the hearts of the dead in Osiris' judgment halls of the dead. Once the dead reached the halls, Ma'at would weigh the heart on each person against the weight of her ostrich feather. If the heart weighed the same or less the feather, they were considered just and worthy of continuing into du'at, which is death or an everlasting life. If the scales indicated that the heart was heavier than the feather, then the person was shown to not be a follower of Ma'at during his or her life. The consequences of this was that the deceased was refused an afterlife and the heart was eaten by a demon. In some versions, the judgment, the crocodile-headed Maat would devour the entire person. Pharaohs worshipped Maat. Pharaohs in ancient Egypt were simply rulers, but were also seen as gods. The idea that all gods were worshipped and respected Ma'at meant that the pharaohs of Egypt must also seek Ma'at in order to prosper. Egyptians believed that if a pharaoh did not follow Ma'at, the chaos will return and destroy the world. Many pharaohs wanted to show that Ma'at blessed them and that they were everything Ma'at represented. Wanting to be seen as good leaders, they will often call themselves the lords of Ma'at. This showed that they had truth and justice in their heart. Egypt's pharaohs often took great efforts to discredit previous rulers. This practice has strengthened their position of power by saying that the previous pharaoh did not have Ma'at in his heart. The current pharaoh will position himself as the savior of Egypt by restoring truth, justice, and order. The concept of Ma'at is important because this is what Pharaoh's mindset was. And Pharaoh was driven by many gods, but he was the representation of Ra or Re, the sun god. And Maat was the goddess of justice, order, right? So Pharaoh was called to keep this. He was called to keep order, to keep justice. And in this moment in time, when we read the story and we understand the biblical account, Pharaoh is being judged by Adonai, and Pharaoh's heart is hardening. And Ma'at is the one that judges that heart in the Egyptian mythology or ideology. Okay? And so Adonai has confronted Pharaoh. And in Pharaoh's mind, this is what he, from what we read, is envisioning. So this is why it is a little tedious this week, and we read a lot of information. But the reason is for you to understand the mindset of them, because we lose a lot in the Torah portions, and we read multiple chapters. And so if we don't pay attention, there's a lot of historical context that we don't understand. And so we don't understand why God is doing what he's doing and why he's approaching Pharaoh the way that he's approaching Pharaoh. And so understanding that Pharaoh was expected to keep order. This is why his sorcerers say, till when are you going to let these people basically destroy Egypt? Let them go. Because they themselves understood that this was the hand of God, the finger of God. They said last week's Torah portion. And they wanted Pharaoh to relieve the chaos that they were going through. But Pharaoh doesn't do that. Pharaoh becomes unjust and decides to keep on oppressing, or at least try to. And Adonai keeps judging his heart. But Adonai glorifies himself, because in this week's Torah portion, Adonai says to the people, I'm going to bring these plagues on you. And to the Egyptians himself, he says, I'm going to bring these plagues, protect your livestock, protect yourselves. And if you listen to my voice, you will be protected. But if you don't, this plague will fall upon you. And there Adonai is becoming a true and just God. He's creating a contrast to what Pharaoh has portrayed to his people. And not only to his people, but to the world. Adonai not only showed his power, but his mercy and his grace. And his justice. And so Pharaoh is being judged. And in this week's Torah portion, we read about the most important part to us when it comes to the Exodus story. And it is the exit. And so we're going to read a little bit about it, and then we're going to head out. Okay? So let's read. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this is the month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year to you. Speak to the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. Now if the household is too small for the lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them, according to what each man shall eat. You are to divide the lamb. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male of 1 year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts of the lintel of the house in which they eat. They shall eat and flesh the same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat of any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs, along with its entrails. You shall not leave any of it over until morning, and whatever is left on it until morning you shall burn with fire. Now you shall eat this manner with your loins girded on your sandals and on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt, and on that night I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Adonai, final judgment on Pharaoh was the firstborn. But before he does this, he gives an opportunity not only to us, but to those that are listening. And the Passover is what gave the people of Israel the freedom, the final redemption. That blood on doorposts, culturally understood, is that they had gods that in the doorposts they will write and dedicate their houses to whatever god. Adonai had already judged Egypt's gods, and now he was going to erase their ownership on the people of Israel, because now they were going to be redeemed by Adonai, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, through that blood, through the blood of that lamb. And because of the blood of that lamb, the people of Israel and their past was cleansed, so that they can exit and head to Mount Sinai, where they will become a nation and they will receive the structure of the kingdom, the same way that we have the opportunity to do so through the blood of Yeshua, our Messiah. So we have access to the kingdom, we have access to the promises, and we have the opportunity to be redeemed as long as we are willing to obey Adonai's voice and stay faithful to him, to his order, and to his justice and righteousness. So, don't be like Pharaoh. Don't get stubborn in your own heart. Obey Adonai, listen to his voice, and stay consistent. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.